So what is the Czech Republic up to again? There was a demonstration called We Stand with the President, which nearly 100,000 people attended, and today we're going to do a little review of it here. Because yesterday, together with the chat and about 600 people, we watched it live, and I think it's pretty good to talk about what it was about, what was said there, what it was like, how it all came across, how it turned out, and so on. Because, of course, there's a lot of talk and a lot of nonsense around it, so yeah, let's sum it up. Basically, the basic facts are that about 90 to 100,000 people came to Wenceslas Square, specifically the lower part, which isn't closed off at the moment, and to Old Town Square and the surrounding streets. Besides that, smaller demonstrations were organized in Brno, Pardubice, Hradec Králové, I think in Plzeň, and simply put, in the biggest Czech cities. And so many people came to this, let's say, first demonstration, which happened 3 months after the new government was formed, even though that government didn't have confidence. Simply 3 months after the elections, so many people came to this, let's say, first bigger demonstration for 3 reasons. First, Pavel is very, very popular. It is still a fact that about 58% of the Czech Republic supports Pavel, actively supports him. Around 20% of the Czech Republic basically doesn't care about him. But at this moment, when he was in this defensive position and Makinka was acting like an arrogant jerk, many of them could have switched to his side. And at the same time, there are about 20 or 23% of the population who have long declared that they outright hate Petr Pavel. Most likely among them will be ultra-liberals or former dissidents, possibly fanatical anti-communists, but of course also voters of the government parties at this moment, government voters. So it will be a mix of people who hate him because he is pro-Western, but use the argument that he was a communist just to annoy someone, all the way to people who are genuinely bothered by the fact that he was a communist. Although I think those people will be an absolute minority, honestly, I can't imagine that there are really a lot of people in this country who are genuinely bothered by someone having been a communist, especially since it's been such a long time since then. However, that's basically the first point about why there were so many people there. Pavel is really very popular. At the same time, on the other hand, Petr Matsinka is extremely unpopular and he's not really helping himself. Of course, by taking such a strong stance, he's probably getting some people on his side right now, but his overall popularity at this moment has reached a certain ceiling that he won't be able to surpass. That's usually how it goes. When you're a radical politician or you take a radical stance, you get the radical people on your side, but you're not able to cross a certain threshold. And Matsinka has actually locked himself into this radical circle at this moment. And overall, of course, it's important to realize that compared to, for example, Vrabel's demonstrations, it was mainly people from the countryside who attended Vrabel's demonstrations. That means those people had to get up in the morning, buy a ticket with their low income, travel to Prague, stay here, freeze for a while, and then go back home. The whole Sunday wasted, 700 crowns down the drain, maybe even more. If I went to this demonstration, it would cost me 700 just for the ticket. So it's logical that at a demonstration that's more focused on supporting the president and therefore on supporting people who are more liberal and more pro-Western, more people will come to this demonstration simply because it's held in places where these people mostly live, since these more liberal people mainly live in big cities. In Prague, in Pardubice, in Plzeň, in Brno. You probably know what big cities are, right? I don't understand why I explained that. Anyway, let's get to the actual content of the demonstration. This is probably the biggest problem because the demonstration, and I've said this from the beginning, actually didn't have any real substance. It didn't have that energy, it didn't have that sense of why are we actually here? Because Petr Pavel won this situation quite easily. On social media, the fight is already settled. Politically, it's like a political machine running where one side says we won't support Makinek, but it wouldn't be blackmail. And the other side says Babiš is an idiot, it was blackmail, and Makinek is also an idiot. So here we see in the political scene in parliament, the political machine is running. Society as a whole is clearly leaning towards Pavel. So this demonstration didn't really have that sense of why are we actually here. It didn't have that urgency. It was simply a kind of symbolic uprising. The speakers came there and said what they had to say. There were worse speakers, there were better speakers. For me, for example, this gentleman from Slovakia who came to shout in the square was really very strange. Then there was Minar, of course. He kept stretching out his arm so they could take a million pictures of him looking like he's giving a Nazi salute. Right? But in reality, of course, he was just pointing into the crowd like that. Nevertheless, of course. Then there were other speakers. Like this gentleman, the official, he spoke very dramatically. This official here, I'm not sure if you can see him. Let me try to find a closer shot. Yes, this gentleman, he was here as an official who stood up to state power and thus lost his position, which was quite chilling, but that was some time ago. And then there were actors, actresses, a voice actor, the voice actor for Leonardo DiCaprio, this gentleman with glasses, the half-bald one. And yeah, overall it was all in the style of we stand with the president, thanks for coming, democracy, democracy, but liberal democracy. Makinka is an idiot, motorists are idiots. Very good was the gentleman who does the show Klimatomluva. If you're interested in global warming, ecology in general, but you don't want to hear scaremongering like Danusha Nerudova saying we're all going to burn, or nonsense from motorists saying carbon monoxide, 2 is a beneficial gas and we should have as much of it in the atmosphere as possible, and it actually does nothing because blah blah blah, then watch Klimatomluva. In my opinion, he presents it very well. I like that he doesn't use emotional blackmail with, for example, dying polar bears. On the contrary, he tries to debunk these eco-alarmist hoaxes. So for me, he does it very well, and I recommend this Instagram account, or he also has TikTok and so on. However, back to the demonstration, I just wanted to highlight this speaker. And then, of course, there was also a female speaker who fired up the whole square with the slogan, "Long live Peter Pavel." But she had such energy and charisma and such enthusiasm that she could have swept me along and made me chant even "Long live Husak." At that moment, I wouldn't have cared as long as she was happy. However, regarding the demonstration itself, I'd like to say that the content really was like that. It was more symbolic, and getting 100,000 people to a symbolic demonstration is a solid achievement, no doubt about it. But as I said, the content wasn't really there. They even had to bring up that Babiš has some unresolved conflict of interest, which in this context seems to me like we're shooting ourselves in the foot, because Babiš is a mainstream politician, and it's important that people who voted for Babiš don't feel like those who support Petr Pavel are against them. The real conflict here is with SPD and with the motorists and Babiš and ANO, and we need these things, if not on our side. Then at least so they don't dig in their heels. Simply put, I think that the demonstration in support of Petr Pavel really shouldn't have had an anti-Babiš agenda, because by doing that, we're really undermining the efforts to create a Hradano coalition. So yeah, I dare say that I'm not happy with this, and even though, of course, it's nice in an idealistic way that you want Babiš to return 7 billion and for him to be prosecuted and all that, yeah, in an idealistic sense, it's very nice, but pragmatically, in real politics, this could cause problems here, and we really don't need this mainstream established politician named Andrej Babiš to be fully thrown over to the other side of the barricade, to the side of internet populists and pro-Russian cronies and those kinds of people. We really don't need that. We need to keep this relatively decent and relatively centrist politician where he is, not to radicalize the voters of the ANO movement and Andrej Babiš himself by constantly attacking them, even though the demonstration isn't really supposed to be about that. Yeah, but that's unfortunately a lesson in real political thinking that a lot of people just aren't capable of, and that brings us to the demonstrators. The demonstrators themselves were, of course, just regular people from all age groups, from children to seniors, Really, everyone was there. The demonstration was very peaceful. I think there was only one swear word, and that was from Minaj. And basically everything went completely smoothly. Of course, people left a mess around the trash bins because the bins were overflowing, but from what I saw, the square was relatively clean, except for the area around the bins. So I really want to say one thing, and that is that the people who were there often couldn't explain their motivation for being there or defend their position. In other words, they couldn't really argue their point. If you came there as a conservative debater, because if, say, Charlie Kirk came to life, learned Czech, and came to that demonstration to debate with liberals, he would destroy most of them in an argument or back them into a corner, you know. Basically, if I put on a costume of a supporter of motorists and used these arguments, I could just wipe the floor with most of those people in an argument. Because the vast majority of the population, whether they're liberals, conservatives, social democrats, Pirate Party voters, or yes, most of the population, isn't able, face to face with someone who's trying to convince them or argue with them, face to face with someone who has some debating skills. They're not able to defend their position in a way that would succeed in front of an audience. In other words, people are just dumb and they don't really know why they do what they do. They can't defend their position with facts or anything like that. Nevertheless, that's just the factual situation. There are simply people like that. Most people who pay attention to politics just by passing by once or twice and occasionally seeing something pop up on social media are emotional people who can't really argue their position, but they can at least recognize what emotion they have. So yeah, that's the position, that's politics, that's how people are. And overall, the fact that various people, let's say people like Debatný deník and so on, used to go to protests against the government and found out that the people there didn't have any real arguments is showing up here as well. That even people who are for or against the government today also don't really have any solid arguments. They're not confident in those arguments, in those facts, in those details, but they're confident in their emotions. And in the end, well, that's not enough. It definitely shouldn't be enough, but it seems like it has to be enough because that's the actual situation. Yeah, so that's how it is. Another thing that needs to be said is, of course, the organizers. As for the organizers, it was Milion Švilek. As for Milion Švilek, what's crucial about them is that they've already collected over 600,000 signatures. Greetings to all the Lukáš Noskas who signed. This gentleman here, no, this is Lukáš Čapek. I don't know why Lukáš Čapek showed up there when I searched for Lukáš Nosek. Anyway, Lukáš Čapek, greetings to you, Lukáš, hello. Lukáš Nosek from Hradec and 3 Lukáš Noskas from Liberec. A soldier, a teacher, and unspecified, and a financial analyst. Those are the Lukáš Noskas, so greetings to Lukáš. But overall, this petition, it has a fundamental problem in that the only things you need to sign it are an email address, a phone number, and your permanent address. Basically, it's not really verified, so if you create some fake phone numbers and fake emails, although actually you don't even have to provide a phone number, that's optional. So if you create 50 emails, you can sign it 50 times. That means for now the number isn't there yet. Final. Of course, that number isn't exact. If you look, it's 680,000. 680,000 have signed so far, but as I said, it's not final. It will probably be filtered further, and if you wanted to sign it, if you found any duplicates, those of you who maybe want to If you want to support the petition in some way, the authors are directly asking you here to report duplicate signatures and to have them checked if necessary. So far, they state that they have removed 15,000 signatures from it. Yes, so 15,000 signatures were either duplicates or from fake accounts like Adolf Hitler and so on and so forth. Honestly, I feel sorry for the one real Adolf Hitler living in the Czech Republic because he was born to Filip Turek, man, and he couldn't sign it, you know. There's nothing you can do. Ada, change your name. Anyway, yes, this is the Million Moments petition, but another thing around Million Moments is, of course, the question like they're fighting for democracy. Million Moments is fighting for democracy. Why did they protest against Miloš Zeman before? And now they're protesting for Petr Pavel basically on a similar issue, namely that the president doesn't want to appoint a minister. Well, what can you say? Million Moments is simply an opposition non-profit and an opposition political organization, or not a political organization, but an opposition movement, opposition. They're simply opposition. Okay, they're opposition. They're not neutral. They're not on one specific side. They're not just for the pirates, or for the mayors, or for Civic Democratic Party. They're not tuned like that they'd be directly for some specific party, but they're on the side of a certain political direction, a certain direction of politics. Therefore, they're not for the Democrats, for democracy. I'd say it should be renamed to A Million Moments for European Democracies or something like that, because that's exactly what they're doing. And then, of course, regarding the appointment or non-appointment of the minister, even when it was being dealt with by Zeman, as for Lipavsky, I honestly wasn't that interested at the time, and I basically thought, well, we'll see who they appoint, whoever they want. Since then, I've gotten a bit more involved in politics, and I believe that the president should have more powers if they're elected directly. That means, for example, that he should have the power to refuse a minister. He shouldn't have the power to pick a specific one, but he should have the power to refuse a minister. He should have this power, for example, once. Or he could have the power to say, okay, the elections turned out the way they did. I'll appoint all the ministers you propose, but I have three names who simply won't be ministers. And then he would simply show the list and say, from those who ran for the Chamber of Deputies today, or something like that, or those being considered as ministers, these ones can't be ministers, this one, this one, this one. Petr Pavel might come and say, okay, fine, great. So this government won, perfect. These parties won, great. Well, I'll appoint all the ministers that Andrej Babiš proposes, but Filip Turek, Jindřich Reichel, and Tomi Okamura will not be ministers, period. Otherwise, add whoever you need. Yeah, something like that, why not? Well, of course, as far as I'm concerned, that's my opinion, that's my stance, and it's consistent. As for how Million Moments for Democracy protests, well, of course, they're hypocritical in their own way, because whether it's Lipavsky or Turek, the arguments are basically similar, even though, of course, Zeman first argued incompetence, while Petr Pavel argues moral unsuitability. But overall, it's about the fact that there are probably some personal issues there as well, and a certain general antipathy, yeah. So hey, file a competence lawsuit or change the constitution, and that's what I suggested, thank you. That's it, Million Moments for Democracy. And now, more questions, for example, how can so many people, like, how can 600,000 people sign a petition? And how can 100,000 people go to a demonstration that supports some komipavka? Look, it's really simple. Nobody cares about the communist past here anymore, like really nobody. Petr Pavel, a soldier in the communist army, Czechoslovakia, paratrooper, intelligence course, whatever, security clearance in the Czechoslovak People's Army. Whatever, like since then he's done a lot of things that proved he's really not a hardcore communist, you know. Andrej Babiš, Prime Minister, former statný bezpečnost agent and communist, he never really apologized for it, he never seemed to regret it, he hides. Otto Klempíř, Minister of Culture, former informer for the Státní bezpečnost, he reported his friends for money. Supposedly he was pressured into it, but I don't know if the Státní bezpečnost was really able in 85 or 88 to pressure someone so much that you just had to give in. They probably just threatened you, okay? So in this respect, obviously nobody in this country cares at all about the communist past. Like literally nobody. That's all I can tell you about that. Overall, the communist presence is worse, which at that moment makes it clear why it was enough, why it completely failed. And then it's maybe a little worrying that, for example, Miloš Zeman supported Stachilo, right? Or that Turek said back then that he would have no problem supporting the government for Stachilo. And then Vachinka had to put out the fire saying that actually, no, that's not the case. But Turek has already spoken out. So in this regard, yes, it seems that people really don't care at all about the communist past. Honestly, I don't care about it at all either. And what really interests me is mainly what that person did after the revolution, in the time of freedom, when no one could be pressured into anything because of their career and so on and so forth. That's where the wheat is separated from the chaff. That's where we really find out who, for example, continued to serve in the army, achieved great success within the structures of our allies, studied at American schools and so on, and who was selling or promoting the sale of fake lamps for a lot of money to people who were dying of cancer. Well, simply put, it's good. Only freedom shows what a person is really like. Totalitarianism shapes people into individual lines. There's also the argument that Ukrainians and Ukrainian flags were present. Fair, there were likely Ukrainians there, sure. A Ukrainian flag is either in the hands of a Ukrainian or in the hands of someone who supports Ukraine, and that flag is more of a symbol of the fight against Russia. And for a Western orientation rather than anything else at that moment. At the demonstrations of the so-called deplorables, there were Russian and Soviet flags, yeah. Simply put, everyone supports something different by choosing which flag or banner they carry. Someone brings a Soviet flag to a demonstration, and by doing so supports Russian imperialism and the killing of innocent people. Bringing a Ukrainian flag supports the fight against Soviet imperialism and defends those being killed. Simply put, everyone has slightly different values in what they want. And overall, look, here's my final assessment of the whole demonstration. 7 out of 10. Mainly because of how many people showed up, and especially thanks to those few good speakers. Overall, the organization was fine, but it loses a lot because the content was kind of all over the place. Maybe I'd say 6.5 out of 10, a weak 7 out of 10. It definitely wasn't as good as Letna or the best demonstrations by Dezole, right? Because at Dezole's demonstrations, at least there was real emotion. Like, yeah, let's make a revolution. Here it was more symbolic and kind of a bit boring. So that's how it was. Have a nice day, go to demonstrations, and support this YouTube channel. See you and bye. Oh, and on your way you can sign that petition. Why not? You should definitely follow the channel Debatní deník if you want to improve your debating and argumentation skills as a person. Or of course you should subscribe here because even though I'm not very good at debating and argumentation, I'd say I can at least point out some key points. Alright, take care and see you later.